Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Kunja Bihari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jai Nitya Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Hari Vrajakacharya Astotara Sata Shri Srimad Bhagavatam Abhay Charana Aravinda Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Hari Vrajakacharya Ashtotar Satashishi Majis Vangasura Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaji Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Namacharya Shiraidas Thakuri Ki Brahmzakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Sri Sri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Braj Bhumi Shri Vrindavan Ki Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Purusham Chitra Jagannathpuri Dham Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled bodies. All glories to the assembled bodies. All glories to the assembled bodies. All glories, Lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Guranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Vishnu Padaya Krishna Sanjana Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Iti Uchivangs Tatra Suyodanena It Yuchivangs Tatra Suyodanena It Yuchivangs Tatra Suyodanena Pravridha Kopa Spuritadarena Pravrita Kopa Spuritarena Pravrita Kopa Spuritadarena Idyuchivang Statra Suyodanena Pravridha Kopa Spuritadarena Asat Krita Sat Sprihaniya Shila Asat Krita Sat Sprihaniya Shila Asat Krita Sat Sprihaniya Shila Chata Sakananuja Sobalena Chata Sakarna Nuja Sobalena Chata Sakarnuja Sobalena Asatkrita Satspriyaniya Shila Chata Sakana Nuja Sobalena Idyuchivang Statra Suyodanena Pravridda Kopa Spuritadarena Asatkrita Satsprihaniya Shila Chata Sakana Nuja Sobalena Idyuchivang Statra Suyodanena Pravridda Kopa Spuritadarena Asatkrita Satsprihaniya Shila Chata Sakarna Nuja Sobalena. Okay. Iti thus Uchivan while speaking Tatra there Suyodanena by Duryodhana pravridha, swollen with, kopa, anger. It's kind of interesting the way Prabhupada translates swollen with anger. It's like I remember a few years ago I was on an evening walk and I didn't have a torch or anything with me, and I was just walking along the road and I went to put my foot down. I just had this sense there was something there. I looked down, there was a Death Adder on the road. So I quickly sort of came up here and found one of the devotees, and they came down with a broom and a bucket, actually a squeegee and a bucket, and they put, because Death Adders move slow unless they're going to strike, and then they move incredibly fast, so fast you can't actually see them strike. And so they managed to catch it put the squeegee down on the back of the Death Adder's head, and the Death Adder was just there hissing and puffing itself up and flattening itself out and puffing itself up. So just like that, swollen with anger. The thing was so angry, and so this is Duryodhana, so angry. Spurita, flapping. Adharena, lips. It's really descriptive, and his lips are flapping. Then asakrita, insulted. Sat, respectable. Sprihani Shila, desirable qualities. Chata, vidura. Sa, with. Karna, Anuja, younger brothers. So this is Duryodhana's younger brothers. Sobalena, Shakuni. Now the reason we see here that it's describing how Duryodhana has insulted Vidura. And it's saying here also, Sa, Karna, Anuja. Anu means the followers, Ja means birth. So those who are born after him. Yeah? And Sobalena means the son of Sobal, which means Sakuni, the brother of Gandhari. And so they were actually always giving Duryodhana bad advice. They're always encouraging him in his nefarious activities. And so that's the significance here of because he's insulting Vidura, he's being encouraged by Karna and by his younger brothers and also by Sakuni. Because as we know, Sakuni, he's the one who was in the gambling match on behalf of Duryodhana, who was gambling against Yudhisthira. But he was expert. He basically used loaded dice. He had these dice that he could throw, and whatever he wanted them to come up as, they'd come up as. Some sort of mystic sort of dice he had there. So they were always encouraging Dhritarashtra. Translation. While speaking thus, Vidura, whose personal character was esteemed by respectable persons, was insulted by Duryodhana, who was swollen with anger and whose lips were trembling. Duryodhana was in company with Karna, his younger brothers, and his maternal uncle Shakuni. Responsibly, please. While speaking thus, Vidura, whose personal character was esteemed by respectable persons, was insulted by Duryodhana, who was swollen with anger and whose lips were trembling. Duryodhana was in company with Karna, his younger brothers, and his maternal uncle Shakuni. Purport. It is said that giving good counsel to a foolish person causes the fool to become angry, just as feeding milk to a snake only increases its venomous poison. Saint Vidura was so honourable that his character was looked up to by all respectable persons, but Duryodhana was so foolish that he dared to insult Vidura. This was due to his bad association with Shakuni, his maternal uncle, as well as with his friend Karna, who always encouraged Duryodhana in his nefarious acts. So, very nice pastime that's unfolding here. And we see now that what's happened is Vidura was called by Dhritarashtra to give him counsel, because it was a difficult situation. He wanted to understand what was the right thing to do. And let me just go back a little bit. Yeah, because what they're trying to do is the war's about to happen. The Balakurukshetra is pending, and Krishna has just come there. He was sent by Arjuna as a messenger, and now Dhritarashtra is asking his half-brother Vidura, who was very dear to him. He was very, very attached to Vidura. And as we know, Ramai Swami was talking about the other day, how Vichitravirya had married. Well, actually, initially there was 3 girls, but one of the girls was in love with Jarasandha. Jarasandha or Salya, I can't remember. Anyhow, one of those persons she was in love with, so she went back and she was ultimately rejected and later became, I can't remember the name. Sorry, just going a bit blank on names right now. But the one that wanted to fight Bhishma, can't remember that, at Kurukshetra. Anyhow, so what happened is he wound up marrying 2 of these girls, and by one of the girls, Amba, Dhritarashtra was born. But when Bhishma and Satyavati were having the conversation, because Vichitravirya died, there was no children, and they were having the conversation about what are we going to do because there's no heir. And for the Kshatriya, because these blood lineages, it's like, talk about genetic, what do they call it, when you're kind of genetic engineering. They really were focused on making sure that the children were coming in a good bloodline. They're very qualified children because they had to rule the kingdom. They had to, but not just rule the kingdom, but they needed to have good qualities in order to rule the kingdom without, creating disturbance, and actually seeing to it that the citizens achieved the ultimate goal of life, Krishna consciousness. That was the business of the king, was to see to it that all the members of the Varna and the ashram system were following their duties properly in order to achieve the ultimate goal of life. And therefore that took a very greatly qualified person. And we can just reflect on what's going on in this day and age. We see that oftentimes, there's so many calamities, and now we're seeing it's increasing more and more every day, increasing the calamities in this world. And essentially the leaders have no idea what to do. They're kind of lost. They don't really know how to solve the situation. They've got some ideas and they try them out, and oftentimes they make the situation worse. Actually, most of the time they make the situation worse. But with in Vedic society, the Kshatriya children were trained from childhood to lead. And we see that was the case with the Pandavas, with the Kauravas, how they had Drona there, they had other, Kripa and all these personalities. Bhishma were training them. Bhishma was training them in morality and the principles of Dharma. And then we see how Kripa and Drona were teaching them how to be Kshatriyas, how to be warriors. So they're very, very carefully trained. So what was happening was Satyavati and Bhishma were very concerned that there was no heir to the throne. So Bhishma was saying, if we could find someone who could impregnate these girls, then this would, because actually first what happened was Satyavati was asking him to do it, and he was saying, no, I've taken a lifelong vow of celibacy, I won't do it. And so she was very concerned about that. So then she said, no, Bhishma said we need to find someone who can impregnate these girls. And then she remembered whatever came to her mind, that actually about Vyas being her son. And as soon as Bhishma heard the name Vyas, he offered his pranams. Vyas, a very, very venerable sage, very respected personality. And so then, because Vyas had told her when he was born, he told his mother when he was born, that if you just think of me, I'll come. And so she thought of Vyas, and he appeared there. And so she described the situation to Vyas, and he said, okay. He agreed to it, and he said, but they'll have to perform tapasya, to become suitably qualified, I think he said for a year, from memory, to become qualified for me to, deposit my semen in them. And then Satyavati was, no, we can't wait, you have to do it immediately, it has to happen now. And then he said, well, then they'll have to tolerate my, unattractive appearance, because he's just an ascetic. He lives in the forest. He doesn't kind of take care of his body so much. He bathes in the river, whatever. So his hair is matted. His skin is dark. It's very sort of like swarthy looking and stuff like that. So they agreed. And then so first off he meets with Amba, and she's so terrified by her appearance that during the whole time when that he's impregnating her, she's got her eyes tightly closed, and she's like this the whole time. She's really, I don't like this, but because I have to do it for the dynasty, etc., I'll tolerate it. So then Vyas comes out, and Satyavati was, well, is everything okay? And he said, yes. She will, he will have she will have a son who will be a great warrior. But he'll be the father of many sons, etc., like that. But because she had her eyes tightly closed the whole time, her son would be blind. And she's like, oh no, a blind child can't be the leader of the kingdom. So she said, well, she asked Vyasa, well, you need to try and impregnate the other girl. So he said, okay, I'll do that, and came back sometime later. And then with I think it was Ambalika. Because there's Amba, Ambalika, and Ambika. I think Ambika was the wife of Shalya or whichever. I get the names mixed up, but there's three of them. But as I said, the other one had gone back to Shalya and was rejected by her. And then so what happened was the second time he came, that the girl, because she'd been instructed, don't close your eyes, you got to stay conscious during the whole thing. And so she did, but she was so terrified by Vyas, she actually went white with fear. And so then what happened was Vyas comes out, and Satyavati says, so is everything okay? Will we have a leader? And so he says yes, but because she was white with fear, this son will be white, and he'll be known as Pandu, the white one. And then Satyavati was concerned, well, if we only got one heir, what happens if he dies in battle or something? Because, the experience of Chitravira dying of consumption or tuberculosis. So she wanted to have another child. And so then Vyasa agreed, and he said, okay, I'll do it one more time. And so what happened, I think the first girl, the oldest girl, Amba, again was asked to do it, and she just didn't want to do it, so she sent her maidservant to meet with Vyas. And then what happened was the maidservant served Vyas very nicely. And worshipped him and offered him a seat and did everything like that, and Vyas was very satisfied. And so he agreed to impregnate her, and he did. And then he came out, and Satyavati asked, was everything okay? And he explained what happened, that the maidservant came, but because she served me so nicely, the child will be a great devotee of Krishna, and will be very learned and knowledgeable, and this is Vidura. A very, very great personality. And also, because with a lot of these things, there's so many stories going on, there's a lot of backstories and stuff like that. And we also understand that Vidura, because of this story of Mandavya Muni, cursing Yamaraj, that actually Vidura is also Yamaraj. He's come to actually to preach. The story the Acharyas give is because, like, when he's in his planet, then all day long he's just giving judgment on this, judgment on that. So he's kind of like a judge and jury, and he doesn't have much chance to preach about Krishna because he's a great devotee. He's actually one of the Mahajans, as we see Swayam Buddhara Komara Bali Vasim Vayam. So Vayam means Yamaraj. He talks about we, me. So he's one of the Mahajans, and obviously being a Mahajan, one of the things that he finds very satisfying is to be able to speak about Krishna, to spread Krishna consciousness. And yet when he's in his kingdom doing his service, he doesn't get much opportunity. So for him, this was a wonderful opportunity to come down and preach Krishna consciousness, which he did his whole life. He was just always instructing guiding the Pandavas and the Kauravas in the principles of Dharma and the principles of Krishna consciousness. And this is what was happening here, and we see in the previous verses. He said three things which were quite prominent and quite powerful and very, very painful to Duryodhana. You know what the first thing is, he said? The thing that probably hurt him the most. Give them their share of the kingdom. He didn't want to do that. Later on we see when actually I think it was early on, when Krishna came and Krishna was asking him to return the kingdom to the Pandavas, he said, I will not give them, because he said just give them 5 villages, because Kshatriya, especially because the Pandus come in the Kaurava line, and the Kauravas are the leaders of the world. They are the prominent Kshatriya race. We see that one of in the Gita, when Arjuna, after he saw the universal form described in chapter 11, then he starts to become quite fearful, and he said, he says, hey Saketi, he says, oh my friend, I've addressed you in so many familiar ways. I've addressed you as hey Yadava, hey, So by the Acharyas explained that when when Arjuna was addressing Krishna as Yadava, he's pointing out that you're a lesser Kshatriya dynasty than us. We are the ruling dynasty. You are a lesser dynasty. So the Kauravas are very, very, they are the ruling dynasty. So Krishna was going to Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana as a messenger and saying, you have to give them something. You have to, even if you don't want to give them the whole kingdom, at least give them 5 villages because they have to rule. That is the nature. They're Kshatriyas. They need subjects. They need to rule. They need to be able to tax people. And Duryodhana very cruelly responded, I will not give them enough land into which to drive a point of a pin. So, how small is that? You don't need much land to put a point of a pin into. So mean-spirited. And so when Vidura, when he says to them, give them land, give them their rightful claim, Duryodhana was just I will never give them anything. This is my kingdom. He was so attached. Then the second point he made to them that was very, very powerful was that Lord Krishna is on their side. And for Duryodhana, so what? They've got a magician on their side. Big deal. He just wasn't at all swayed by that argument because he didn't think that Krishna was of any significance. And this is one of if you look in the Mahabharata, especially at the Battle of Kurukshetra, when Duryodhana, he's berating Duryodhana. So when Duryodhana was berating Bhishma, why aren't you doing more to try and win the battle? And like Bhishma's fighting to the best of his capacity, and Bhishma, if you look at some of the stories in the Mahabharata, you can see that Bhishma is an extraordinary warrior. There is, I actually saw that there's this fella in Scandinavia somewhere. I can't remember his name. Someone sent me a link a while ago about this video, and this guy, he can fire arrows like you wouldn't believe. He holds like 5 arrows in his hand at once, and he goes doom, 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 doom like that, and just shoots them off. And he's like jumping through the air and somersaults and all this sort of stuff, and hitting his target. just like you can imagine the Kshatriyas were. You know, it's described how, like Bhishma, when he would fire his arrows, it was like a continuous line. They were touching, the arrows were touching each other. He was firing them so fast, and his bow was constantly in a circle because he was just firing so fast. And like, you know, sometimes when you look at these things, you hear these things. Oh yeah, it's all kind of like poetic and made to sound good. But after seeing this video of this guy, and this is a recent video on YouTube. I can't remember his name, some Scandinavian fellow. You can understand that actually, you know, these Kshatriyas, they were born to do this. They were trained their whole life to do this. So that they must have been so much more capable than this you know, ordinary fellow. And so Bhishma was understood to be the greatest warrior on the planet. And he's being berated by Duryodhana. Why aren't you fighting more strongly? Why aren't you killing the Pandavas? And then so Bhishma started to explain to Duryodhana. He said, you know, that Arjuna, he is the greatest archer that's ever been known. You know, you cannot defeat him. You know, and Yudhisthira, he is the most pious of all kings. You cannot defeat him. And Bhima, you know, he is born to kill you, all of you Kauravas. All 100 sons, he's born to kill you. You cannot defeat him. And, you know, Krishna is on their side. Krishna is the unlimited Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as long as, and whoever is on his side, whether he fights or not, you cannot defeat them. And still, Duryodhana could not see this. He could not accept that he was going to be defeated. It's just like, you know, if you look at, I was reading something the other day, you know, it was you know, the pastime where, you know, with the birth of Lord Krishna, and you see how Kamsa wanted to kill Krishna, and his ministers, same kind of thing, you know, Duryodhana's being ill-advised by these foolish people. So same thing with Kamsa, he's being ill-advised by his ministers. If you do this, if you do that, if you persecute the Brahmanas, if you know, stop the yajnas and stuff like this, this is how you'll kill Vishnu. They've got this like foolish notion that you can actually kill the Supreme Person of God. They do not accept the transcendental nature of the Lord. They do not accept that the Lord is the Supreme Creator, that the Lord is the Supreme Controller, the Lord is the Supreme Enjoyer. They just don't accept these things. Therefore, they have these ideas that they can do things, they can act in such a way that they will not be, they won't be held responsible, they will be able to kill Vishnu, all these kind of crazy ideas. So Duryodhana had the same notions, and even when Krishna came as a messenger from the Pandavas, especially from Yudhisthira, to try to stop the battle, we see that Duryodhana hatched this plot with Sakuni, Karna and his brothers to capture Krishna. So they had this pit dug in the, you know, because they heard he was coming, they had this pit in the assembly house, and the idea was that a trapdoor was going to open up, Krishna was going to drop down the trapdoor, and voila, they had him as their prisoner. And that was the end of the Pandavas. That was their idea. The Pandavas would be, you know, without Krishna, because we see in a few verses previous, it was mentioning how the Krishna was like one of the family members with the Pandavas. He would just walk in and out the palace and things like that without, you know, announcing or anything like that. So he was very, very intimately connected with the Pandavas. And so their idea was, okay, we capture Krishna, end of story, and we don't have to fight. We've got the kingdom. So they tried that, and then Krishna manifested a partial universal form. And Duryodhana's immediate response, like Bhishma, is like, oh my Lord, you know, he's like offering prayers, and he's so happy. And you know, Drona and the others, they're just amazed at the potency of Krishna. Duryodhana's response, oh, he's just pulling some magic act. What is it? You know, he's just some magician. Anyone can do this kind of stuff. Because many of the rulers and the leaders in those days, they had mystic powers. They could do things like that. But they were just thinking, you know, Duryodhana was just thinking that Krishna was just doing some mystical thing. So he wasn't, when Vidura said that Krishna's on their side, so what? Big deal. I can kill him. And it's just such a foolish idea. And then the last thing that Vidura said to Dhritarashtra in yesterday's verse is, your son is an offense personified, get rid of him. And that, like, you know, that was like a knife in the heart. You know, it was like he was really deeply offended by that. So immediately he responds like, and saying he's hissing like a snake. He's swollen with anger. His lips are trembling, you know, and he wants Vidura out. You know, and we'll see in the coming verses that, you know, he's saying, you know, he's the son of a kept mistress. Straight off, he's attacking him. You know, he's a son of a kept mistress. He shouldn't be allowed to stay in the palace. You should, you know, take to him with canes and beat him with an inch of his life, and you should only leave him with his breath. You know, it's true. And we see that what happens is Vidura, okay, I'm out of here. And Vidura reflects on this. This is the greatness of Vidura, because if we look back to the 13th chapter, because this chapter here is a direct continuation of the 13th chapter of the first canto. We see that because the sages are asking, well, we want to know about this conversation between Vidura and Maitreya, because this is really interesting for us, because it's talking about transcendental subject matters. So we see that in the 13th chapter, how Vidura is instructing his brother, Dhritarashtra, which is where this is leading. I think it's verse 59, I think in the 13th chapter there's 60 verses, and verse 59, the second last verse, it describes how when Dhritarashtra gave up his body, that Vidura was manifesting joy and grief. And joy because he'd been successful on the spiritual path. But, you know, grief, like ordinary people say, oh, he's grieving for the loss of his brother. You know, he's disturbed because his brother's died. Srila Prabhupada gives it a different perspective. He explains that the reason he's grieving is because he was not able to give his brother Krishna prem due to his offences to the Pandavas. So we can see the nature of Vidura, because he's constantly absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. When he's unable to inspire someone in Krishna consciousness, he feels loss. But Dhritarashtra, because of his constant offences to the Pandavas, even though they were the sons of his brothers, of his beloved brother Pandu, and it's described, you know, in various places how you know, he loved Pandu with his heart and soul. Yet, you know, because of his unsort of godly attachment to his completely materialistic attachment to his son Duryodhana, and also his deep attachment to the kingdom of being ruled, because when Pandu died, then he was put in place as the caretaker king, the emperor of the whole world. And he became, because he wasn't a transcendentalist, he was a very materialistic person, he became deeply attached to that. And it was very difficult for him to give it up. And similarly, his sons, especially Duryodhana, became also similarly attached to the kingdom and the facility it offered. And so when Vidura is saying, you know, get rid of him, you know, even when he was born, as was being described yesterday, not only Vidura but also the sages, they saw these inauspicious omens, and like how you know, when Duryodhana was born, how he started to bray like a jackal, and then also all the jackals and other inauspicious animals were also braying and making their noises. And these omens, because at that time also we see that Dhritarashtra consulted with Vidura, because he accepted Vidura's wisdom. He was very attached to Vidura. He accepted his wisdom and his understanding. So he asked him, you know, what should we do? And Vidura, he interpreted these signs, and he said, this child will be the destruction of the dynasty. Get rid of him. Immediately get rid of him. But because he was the firstborn, you know, it was really hard for him to do that. He couldn't do it. And also because Pandu had just, so Kunti had just given birth to Yudhisthira, and I think Bhishma was probably the same age, similar age, but he'd given birth to Yudhisthira, so there was this competitive kind of concept there. So it was very difficult, to hear, give up the kingdom to the Pandavas, drive him out because he's just an offense personified. That was very difficult, and so then Duryodhana just spun into an attack on Vidura and wanted to drive him out. But then we see with Vidura, he didn't become. Of course, the words affected him because they were very cutting words, but he started to reflect on how the Lord's Maya works. And this is for me part of why this is a really instructive story and very, very important for us, because and Prabhupada explains in a later purport how it was working on two levels, internally and externally. So externally, we see how Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana are completely in the bodily concept of life, and they think they are the controller and the enjoyer. This mentality that's mentioned in the 16th chapter of the Gita, this Ishvaraham Hambhoge, Siddhaham Balavam Sukhi, that I'm the controller, I'm the enjoyer, I'm powerful, I'm happy. This is demoniac mentality. So he's seeing how Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra are completely on the external platform. They're completely affected by the modes of material nature, thinking that they're the ones who are controlling and they're the ones who are enjoying. But also, he's reflecting how, because he was, he had a tremendous opulence, he had a palace, he had all the riches he needed, he had servants, the whole thing, Vidura. He's very well taken care of. And he had all the facility. And he just, when these words were spoken to him, he just left his bow at the door, essentially saying, I want nothing to do with this situation. He just dropped his bow, at the door and saying, I renounce this. But then he's reflecting how the situation can change. How, and we see this. Like we're presented with we may be in one position where we have a nice position, a comfortable position, nice house, nice family, whatever material facility might be there. And at a moment's notice, it can all change. And we see like some people in the prime of life, and then they're struck down with some incredible disease, a completely debilitating disease where they're bedridden for the rest of their life. And this just happens, continuously. These types of things are happening, and Vidura is seeing this change as the mercy of Krishna, because he can give up all this stuff and then just focus his life on serving Krishna. So what he does, he immediately leaves and he goes on pilgrimage. He goes, and it describes in the subsequent verses how he goes and visits all the many temples of Vishnu, and he meets saintly persons, and he's talking about Krishna, he's preaching Krishna consciousness, and finally he meets with Uddhava. Then Uddhava, because Uddhava's just experienced the departure of Krishna, and he's feeling intense separation. So he discusses a little bit about Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan and outside of Vrindavan, and then he basically says, I can't talk anymore, this is too much for me. Go see Maitreya. So then he goes to Maitreya Rishi, and he poses Maitreya Rishi probably about a dozen, 10 or 12 questions, I think. And then Maitreya Rishi answers the questions. And then Vidura, he gets to the point where he says, okay, I'm satisfied, I have no more questions. Then he goes back to Hastinapur and again speaks very strongly. He goes through all the social sort of necessities of greeting the Pandavas and things like that. But then finally he gets alone with Dhritarashtra, and he speaks so strongly. And this is the nature. It's not like he's speaking harshly. He's a sadhu. He's speaking the truth. And sometimes the truth can be painful. Sometimes we hear words from an advanced devotee when you ask them a question, well, how can I, become Krishna conscious or overcome and they just, a sadhu is just going to cut straight to the chase and tell you, this is because of, you are attached to whatever. I mean, sometimes we see, if you listen to Prabhupada's lectures, sometimes he uses very strong words. Very strong words. And it's sometimes a little bit painful to hear these things. So we see that, Vidura, he says to Dhritarashtra when he comes back, he says, you're living like a kept dog, and you're eating the scraps of bhima. You know, you're living, and Bhima is the person you tried to kill, and now you're living at his expense. How can you live like this? And he's speaking very strongly with it. And why? Because Dhritarashtra was so materially attached. He had to, because sadhu means to cut. And what do they cut? This Hridaya Granthi, this knot in the heart, this attachment to all these material things. And we all need this because we have so many material attachments. I mean, it's, so often we're hearing about, so-called advanced devotees who have struggles in Krishna consciousness. It's not an easy thing to overcome the attachments we have in this material world. It's not an easy thing. It takes, serious application. It takes serious dedication to overcome these attachments we have, these knots within the heart. And therefore, the words of the sadhu are meant to cut these attachments, and therefore it's so important for us to hear the words of the sadhu, so we can, this is why, hearing Bhagavatam class, because the Bhagavatam is essentially the words of great personalities and of Srila Prabhupada. When we hear the Bhagavatam, there's nityam bhagavata sevaya. It says to be constantly, to be always engaged in serving the Bhagavatam. And what does serving the Bhagavatam mean? It means to hear the Bhagavatam, it means to preach the Bhagavatam, to speak the Bhagavatam. So to be always constantly engaged in hearing Bhagavatam and speaking the Bhagavatam, this is going to enable us to remove these knots in the heart. Otherwise, we're just going to be caught up in this material complications, life after life. It's the only solution is to hear the topics of Krishna consciousness, and especially from elevated devotees. Especially from elevated devotees, because of their deep realization, but also because they'll speak the truth, and very plainly speak the truth. Okay, finish there. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Sunderland.
I had an earlier question, but I've forgotten that one. And excuse me for nodding off a few times. It was a very nice class. My question is, some people, some devotees say that the scriptures were in that time and place, and we have to now have it in this time and place. Could you comment on that, please?
Mundane concept.
That's a mundane concept.
Completely mundane concept. How can that be the case? They're transcendental.
Yes.
Transcendental is not bound by time and place. Transcendental is eternal. Eternal means no beginning, no end. Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita are eternally relevant. The instructions in the Bhagavatam are eternally relevant. The thing is, we're just trying to adjust the spiritual process to suit our needs. No, we need to adjust our perspective to meet up with the Bhagavatam, to meet up with the Chaitanya Treaty and the Gita, etc. It's just such a mundane concept.
Thank you. I'll just give a comment back. Is some people think it's got to be preached in time and place, and times have changed.
Yeah. Yeah, but eternal principles, transcendental principles never change. And, okay, you can say times change, but if you analyse it, not really. It's the same stuff. Birth, death, old age, disease. It's the same stuff. It's like, the phrase is old wine, new bottle. It's the same thing. Well, Prabhupada sometimes you'd use the phrase old crow, new crow. They're still trying to enjoy their senses. It's the same, the living entity is afflicted with the same challenges, the same weaknesses of heart are there. They never change. If you look at if you read the Gita, the second chapter of the Gita, the third chapter of the Gita, the fourth chapter of the Gita, these same principles that have been talked about there, 5,000 years ago, are still relevant today, will still be relevant in 10,000 years' time, because the nature of the living entity does not change. The conditioning we're dealing with does not change. The challenges we're faced with in this material world do not change. Birth, death, old age, disease. We all experience those four things. Intoxication, meeting, illicit sex, gambling. We're all facing the same challenges. They do not change. They may be packaged differently, and as Kali Yuga progresses, they become more and more perverse. But it's the same thing. It's just a different packaging, that's all. So, that's like the instructions of the Shastra eternal. Now, of course, from the perspective of a preacher may need to look at how to present these things for the modern circumstance. But the instruction is no different, the content is no different, the conclusion is no different. And we see, we have, for instance, yoga now. It has become very common, and so this is a good way of like, it's like bridging the gap between where they are and where we're hoping to get them to. It's a way of bridging the gap, or different. What we see, you have to look at the circumstance that the person's in, right, and see, okay, this is where they are. This is where we want to get them. How do you take them from there to here? So sometimes you may need to package things a little bit differently. It's just like, when you go to the shop, you have the home brand, which is like really plain packaging, and you have the next product next to it, exactly the same product, fancy packaging. Most people go for the fancy packaging because it's attractive to their senses. So that's what we have to do with preaching, is package it in such a way that it's attractive to the condition of the entity. And we see, there's some devotees in ISKCON who are very expert at doing that. They package, or they present Krishna consciousness in such a way that it's really attractive to people. And Krishna consciousness is the most attractive thing in existence. But sometimes, just like we see with Duryodhana, because of his conditioned nature, he can't see that. So the idea is to present Krishna consciousness in a way that it attracts people so they can actually see the true nature of Krishna consciousness.
Some things in the scriptures do seem to be according to other yugas, for example. When we read Kardamamuni and the Dahuti story, and how it says that just by serving your husband you go back to God and regulated. This yuga is seems like upside down.
Yeah, the thing is, like, you have to look at what you're saying is true. They are happening in other yugas. But what are the principles that are being taught? Because the principles are eternal principles, they don't change. If it's an eternal principle, it can't change because it's eternal. If it changes, it means it's temporary. So the principles are eternal principles, they never change. Krishna is God, always. The process of approaching God is always going to be the same. It's through the process of surrender. Whether it's according to whatever the Yuga Dharma is, the process, the way you do it may change, but it's the same principle that ultimately surrender your life to Krishna. So the principle, if they are eternal principles, they can't change.
Yeah, the core principles are the same, but when it comes to new ends, like for example.
But that's just packaging.
So
that's just packaging.
Would you say that the position of the men in Satya Yuga is the same as the position of the men in Kali Yuga?
Kali Yuga is messed up. Completely messed up. I remember there was Keshi Shatru, who was a devotee in France, that had this reggae band years ago, and they had this line in a song that was talking about Kali Yuga, is the women all want to be the men, and the men can only remember when. So it's just talking about the confused nature, how like it's kind of so common in ISKCON, for instance, that the husband will tell the wife, okay, you should be like this, this, and this, and this, like the ideal Vedic wife, yet they themselves are not the ideal Vedic husband. So I think rather than doing this, we should be looking inward and saying, where is my area for improvement? How can I become Krishna conscious? How can I become an ideal person to inspire my wife or to inspire my husband to be a better devotee? Because that's, like married life, for instance, is a situation where we work cooperatively to become Krishna conscious, not where we kind of dominate each other and tell each other how to be. And that's the situation in any field of life or any walk of life in Krishna consciousness, is how can I inspire other devotees to excel in Krishna consciousness. And I mean, trying to compare, the men of this day and age to the men, for instance, of the previous yuga, it's, 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 or the women of this day and age to the women of the previous yuga. There's no comparison. But the principles of religion are still the same.
But then Sadhana got involved there, because that's okay. So Sadhana got involved there because some things are there in the scriptures very clearly. You know, like you read through Bhagavatam, sometimes you read things that they seem very drastic, you know, and absolutistic, like the man is superior, the woman is inferior, or the woman should surrender to the man because the man is very advanced, and only the man will take her back to God. So those principles,
They're eternal. They're eternal.
They seem relative.
No, well, in one sense you can see they're relative. They're relative to the advancement of a person. So, for instance, if a woman marries a man who's very advanced in Krishna consciousness, and they surrender to that person, then it works. Or if the woman's very advanced in Krishna consciousness, and man marries her, and the same kind of principle, it works. Because you're seeing, but traditionally, and it's a little bit kind of, in Kali Yuga, like I say, it's a messed up time, but traditionally the male would take the role of the guru, but in this day and age it's not like that. It's so much. It still is like that, and that still works. So, and the nature of the living entities, they have their intrinsic nature, being in a male body or in a female body, they do have their intrinsic nature, but it's deeply contaminated in this age. So as we become more and more purified through the process of Krishna consciousness, these natures will become more exposed, more revealed. Yeah? But, just to kind of take this position, well, I'm a man, you're a woman, therefore you have to surrender to me. Okay, become a little bit purified first before you take that kind of perspective. It's like everything's messed up, completely messed up in this age. So we need to work on the process of purification before we can become qualified. Because it's like, if you look in the 5th chapter of the Gita, this is, for me, a very instructive verse in the 5th chapter of the 5th canto, where it says, don't become a guru, a husband, a mother, a father, a demigod, or anything. But what's the catch line there? Unless you're capable of delivering your dependence from the cycle of birth and death. That's the qualification. So if one wants to take this position of like, okay, you're my wife, you surrender me, I'll take you back home. Okay, get to the point of being able to deliver your dependence from the cycle of birth and death. Then you can do that. Or if you want to take the position of a leader in a country, okay, get to the position where you can deliver your dependence, which means the whole population from the cycle of birth and death. So to take on any position, this is why Vidura is so extraordinary. To take on any position where you have dependence means you need to be able to deliver them. Being a mother means you need to be able to deliver your daughter. It's a big responsibility. When you have dependence, it's a big responsibility. And that's, don't just like assume the responsibility. Become qualified. That's the challenge. And we all have the same challenge because we all have dependence. And therefore we all have the same responsibility. These are eternal principles. They never change.
Thank you.
Yes, Maria.
You kind of put it on a skill, right? Like the essence is the same.
Yeah.
Back in the days and now, but you kind of like look at this, like you said, circumstance in kind of way like, okay, because it can be so set on rules, right? Oh, it's supposed to be like this.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be like this. But it's also like, okay, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to change? And how do I measure it?
Yeah.
The rules measure, right? So you always have to kind of look at the individual circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.